Hello and welcome to this edition of SAC News in Focus. I'm Michael Taylor. All things in digital media start with story. That means our next guest has one of the most important jobs in the digital media department at Santa Ana College. Ezra Lunel, welcome to our program. You
Thank
teach
you.
digital media, you teach editing,
Yes.
you teach screenwriting, and you teach film history. And every once in a while we throw you in another class, but it's all about story. So what got you interested in story to begin with in your career path?
Right. So it all started for me back in the early 90s when I was in college, and I took my first film production class.
Okay.
And I fell in love with editing. I fell in love with using Final Cut Pro and learning how I could put a story together using small pieces of film and radically change the story depending on the sequence of shots. I loved going out and getting a camera for the class, doing these video assignments, doing short documentaries. We would go into San Francisco and film a little bit of just natural life and assemble them using audio and music that we picked up.
Okay.
It was fascinating.
Did you just go out there with, like, I think I want to shoot something down by the bay, or I want to go shoot the city, or I want to get up? Like, was it just a general idea, or were you storyboarding your stuff before you went out there and kind of a mild scripting?
Not yet. We hadn't gotten to that point yet. For our final project, we did. But early on, we got very specific assignments, the kind of assignments, you know, John Hall might give in his production classes, where you're given a very specific set of parameters. You go out and get those specific check marks checked. In my case, I eventually did do a short film, which I did storyboard. I got students to act for me. We filmed at different locations on campus, and I had my first film premiere at the International House in Berkeley, where my thesis film was screened at that time.
Okay, and what was it?
It was called Reality Rules, and it was a story about a young woman who gets lost in the stacks, the library stacks at UC Berkeley, and meets Jorge Luis Borges, who becomes her guide. So it was kind of fantasy sci-fi crossed with literary kind of nerd things. It was fun. It was a learning experience for sure.
Exactly right. And you got your degree at Berkeley, and what did you decide you wanted to do? Did you say, I'm going to go be a filmmaker, I'm going to go Hollywood to try, or what direction did you go after you got out of school?
I did. I did want to make films, and I eventually did go to film school and make lots of films in film school. I also worked in the industry as an assistant director on quite a few television movies. I worked for Showtime and Lifetime Television. I did a PBS film where I AD'd with Dick Van Dyke was one of the cast. Yeah, so I was AD for Dick Van Dyke back in 2011 and 12. It was for a film called Buttons. And I also worked for television. I did a semester abroad in Paris, and I worked for CNN as a production assistant.
Okay.
I worked for ESPN as a camera assistant. And when I came back to the United States and I went to film school, I also interned for a while at River Road Films as a script reader, and also at a British company called Future Films. And I helped them evaluate scripts and write coverage.
Okay. So when you would sit down and evaluate scripts, that's you figuring out, is there story here? Is there structure? Does it have the pinch? Does it have the midpoint? Does it have its conclusion? So what were you looking for when you were reading those scripts? So what was jumping out at you as the right things to do, and what were jumping out at you as the wrong things to do when being a script writer?
First thing is make sure that your format is impressive. You know how to use the script to make an impression on the reader that you know what you're doing.
Right.
Number two is you want to grab the reader by the scruff of the neck and pull them right into the story. Make sure that they care, that they're involved, that they're interested in your characters and your characters' struggles. You'd be surprised how many scripts out in the industry are really written by people who haven't taken enough classes, frankly.
Right. Well, and formatting, I think a lot of students, or sometimes beginners, novices, even if they weren't students, think, oh, formatting, my script will stand out, it's great, right? But formatting is the language of movies and production. So if you're a professional in the industry and you're reading, it's like reading a poorly grammatically bad middle paragraphs kind of, I'm like, where are we, what scene am I in, where am I at? And if you can read in that language, then you're like, okay, the flow goes, then that story can emerge, right?
Absolutely. It's essential that within the first 3 pages you demonstrate that you know how to write in the correct screenwriting format, that you understand the essence of story, which is character and goals and challenges, and that you entertain as well, that you're able to allow the reader to create a mental movie in their mind and to enjoy that process.
Yeah, I have to get engaged. I have to, okay, I'm excited. Where's the story
Yes.
taking me next, right? And if that doesn't start to happen because you're struggling with the formatting or like what character's talking right now, that can be so distracting, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So punctuation errors, formatting errors are all definitely things you want to avoid.
Where along the line did you say to yourself, I think I'd like to give teaching a try? Because eventually you made your way into the college area and you started saying, okay, I'm going to take all of the experience, the production assistant, overseas work, screenwriting, scripting, video editing, and you said, I'm going to take this and kind of serve students. When did that decision start to happen for you?
Well, for one thing, as an instructor, you can make a steady living, which is great. So you get benefits, you get to work in the area that you love most, and you get to share your passion for film, for television, for story with students. You get to talk about it all day, every day if you want. You get to enjoy the pleasures of story.
Okay. And so when we do that, when you said, okay, when did you know, okay, this is for me. I think I'm going to kind of give up on this path that I thought I wanted to be on, and I'm going to venture into this one.
Well, it started when I was living down in Mexico, and I was actually working in production. I had a business and creative partner, and we were producing documentaries, we were making television commercials, and I was able to teach part-time at the University of Guadalajara down there.
Okay. All right, well, when we come back, we're going to talk about how you teaching classes here, the career paths for our students, and what it's like to be in a class with Ezra Lunel. Stay with us. You're watching SAC News in Focus.
Prepare for college by giving me the first-hand experience. I always wondered how college is going to be. Is it going to be stressful or will it be easy? And it definitely gave me a bit of both sides. It's at my pace. Santa Ana College is definitely giving me the idea that college is for me.
All right, welcome back, and we are back here in SAC News in Focus. My guest is Ezra Lunel, and we've been talking about his career in the world of digital media and movies and your path. Now let's talk a little bit about what we do here. And we talked about story when we started, so I want to get into story. When you sit down and open up your screenwriting class, day one, what are you hoping you can convey to students about the importance of screenwriting and what the class is going to be all about?
Well, what I really want students to do is have courage and to face the page and to put their hearts and their lives and their own stories on the page. And in the class, my goal is to give them the tools, the techniques to learn the craft, to be able to express stories that they have inside of them that they already know that they want to tell, and give them the tools to actually tell it in a way that's engaging.
Do you sit there and say, hey, there's a story within you. Something's happened to you in your life, and give me that story. There's your starting point. Don't make something up in fiction world. Don't put it in outer space. Give me a story or a scene in your life that you remember sticks out to you. Is that kind of a thing you kind of get them to do it first, and that story within them that they know so well already?
That is exactly right. That's exactly what I do. I challenge them to take stories that they already have within them, and usually you're right. It is one story. And believe it or not, it doesn't take very much to pull it out of them because it's already there. They wouldn't be in the class if they didn't have something to say and they didn't want to find a way to express it.
Okay. And then how do you teach them the structure of that? How do you say, okay, but you've got a story here, and now we need to enter structure. How do you help them give that broader picture of how we do this in the industry?
Yeah, well, we take it step by step. We begin by learning the craft of story. So what are the elements of story? We're looking at character, we're looking at desires, we're looking at obstacles, we're looking at goals. Principally, we're looking at fears. And if you notice, a lot of these elements are elements that we have in our own lives. We all have goals, we all have desires, we all have fears, we all have obstacles.
Right. What are the antagonists, whether they're people or things in that life that's going up against us? We need that conflict in there.
Conflict. Conflict is really, really important. Figuring out When we watch someone challenged, when we see someone trying to accomplish something, our attention instantly gets kind of crystallized, and we're focusing and trying to see whether they accomplish it or not, because we're simultaneously entertained by it and we learn from their mistakes.
Yeah. And when you start to tell a story, when someone says, "Oh, I see what you mean," that means they're visualizing it. They can see what you're saying instead of like, "Oh, I hear you," or something like that. But I see what you mean, because that way you've told a story, and now they can visualize what you're talking about. I was walking in the Arctic, and the polar bear came up to me and looked at me, and I looked at it, and it was like a moment. You have that image in your head, exactly what that would look like, right? And so there's that image, there's that, and you know there's conflict. There's a story that's about to start with the polar bear and me.
That's right. And you just did it right now. You created a mental picture that took me right there, and I could imagine the environment, I can see the character, I can see the polar bear. And so the visual element, the ability to tell your story visually, is crucial to the screenwriting craft.
Right, and that's that visual part. So do students sometimes get too bogged down in dialogue? They want to write every word, they want to tell every word instead of show me, it's kind of tell me going on?
Definitely. We rely on dialogue. We tend to think that dialogue is where the story is. The truth is the story is in the images and in the sounds. And dialogue can usually be a distant third or fourth or fifth. It helps, definitely, but mostly it's the question is what are you showing us, when, how, and what visual techniques are you using to pull the audience in?
So that jumps me over to editing, which you also do, which is, there was a whole silent film era, and I think students don't realize that because we're so removed from that, but there was a whole silent film era that went all the way up into the mid-20s. That was like there was no dialogue, and you were still telling full feature-length stories with no dialogue, right? And so when you look at editing, when you do that, how do you tell them here's how you tell story without dialogue, without words?
Yeah, that is a great challenge, and you teach early film history, so you're very familiar with the silent era, and you know perhaps better than anyone that these early stories really did not contain very much dialogue. They might have had a couple of text titles, but the answer to that question really lies in learning different editing techniques. There are basically 4 editing techniques. We could start with continuity editing, creating the illusion of continuity. Another one is montage theory, where we learn to put images together that create meaning. There's another form of editing or filmmaking, which is mise-en-scène, which is how to create an image that speaks of itself, that speaks within itself. The image says everything. And finally, we learn how to use jump cuts, which are discontinuous cuts to tell a story. And so when you learn these different kinds of editing techniques, you really learn the mechanics and the vocabulary of editing.
What's it like when you see a student kind of go through this program, screenwriting, editing, and they're moving down that pathway, and you see that they're starting to get it? What's it like for you to say, okay, here's somebody this person has a possibility to go on to bigger and better things?
It's incredibly gratifying. I see that all the time. We have some of the most talented students in Southern California. I have no doubt. I've seen it year in and year out. I've seen students live up to the challenge. There's students here who are in this production class, in your production class, whose work has moved me literally to tears or to laughter. There are students here who consistently outperform their own expectations. And I'm endlessly surprised and amazed and impressed by the quality of integrity and virtuosity in our students. We have such great students, and it's very fulfilling to be an instructor, to see them move through the course and really take responsibility for their own educations in many ways and be successful.
Do you have students who've gone on and said, hey, I'm working here, I've got it, I'm in this place? Maybe they're not in Hollywood, but they've made it in a certain sense?
Definitely. Just this semester in my screenwriting class, I invited a student who is now in film school at Northridge, and he came back and is speaking to students, telling them how he's studying screenwriting, and he's already worked on certain productions in a writing assistant capacity.
Wow.
He's come back and he's talked to our students, and he's a role model and an inspiration for all of us.
Fantastic. Well, Ezra, you are an inspiration to our students, and we're blessed to have you in the Digital Media Department.
Same here.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on this edition of SAC News in Focus. I want to, of course, thank my guest again, Ezra Lunel, Santa Ana College digital media instructor. I'm Michael Taylor. Make sure you head over to our SAC Student News YouTube channel and watch for more of our in-depth interviews. And there, of course, you can also see our regular edition of SAC News. Thanks for joining us.